Imagine being the most powerful person alive. You say burn it, it burns. You say take them, they're taken. You say build me something the world has never seen, and they build it. For 43 years, that was the reality of one man. And then one day, his mind broke. If you too are the most powerful person alive, check out Pantheon, our brand inspired by myths, legends, and folklore. We ship worldwide and are rated excellent on Trustpilot. Link in the description. Look at this painting. At first glance, it's a man. Unusual posture, on all fours, long beard sweeping the ground, fingernails grown into claws. Something slightly wrong about the proportions, the skin, the way the body sits in the space. Unsettling, not immediately disturbing. But then we add some context. William Blake painted this in 1795 and called it Nebuchadnezzar. The man crawling across the canvas is the most powerful king in the ancient world, the ruler of the greatest empire on earth, the man who built Babylon, destroyed Jerusalem, and made kings kneel. Awareness. He knows exactly what has happened to him. He just can't stop it. That's what makes it one of the most disturbing paintings ever made. The eyes, still human enough to know what he used to be. Blake, he was painting a warning, and to understand it, we need to know who this man actually was. For centuries, Babylon had been someone else's city. The Assyrians had dominated the known world for generations. Their empire stretched from Egypt to Persia. Their capital, Nineveh, was one of the greatest cities on earth. And Babylon, ancient, proud, the city that had once been the center of everything, existed under their control. Then Assyria began to crack. Internal conflict, constant warfare, an empire stretched too thin across too much territory. In 626 BC, a Chaldean chieftain named Nabopolassar seized the moment. He took Babylon, he declared independence, and he spent the next decade systematically dismantling the empire that had owned his city. In 612 BC, his forces allied with the Medes, a powerful Persian tribe from the north, destroyed Nineveh. The empire that had dominated the known world for generations was finished. Nabopolassar had done something almost impossible. He had broken the most powerful force on earth and given Babylon its freedom. But it was his son who would make Babylon a legend. In 605 BC, Nebuchadnezzar was in the field fighting the Egyptians at a place called Carchemish on the banks of the Euphrates. The battle was decisive. He crushed the Egyptian forces completely, eliminated Egypt as a power in the region in a single afternoon. Then a messenger arrived. His father was dead. Nebuchadnezzar turned around and rode back to Babylon. He secured the throne. He became king. He built. The walls of Babylon were rebuilt on a scale that made travelers stop and stare before they even entered the city. The temples were restored, the ziggurats raised, the Ishtar Gate constructed around 575 BC on the north side of the city. The main entrance to Babylon, over 15 meters high, leading into a processional way half a mile long, its walls towering on either side, lined with over 120 images of lions, bulls, and dragons. Every year the statues of gods were carried through this gate in procession for the New Year celebration. Nebuchadnezzar left his own inscription on the gate. In his own words, "I placed wild bulls and ferocious dragons in the gateways and thus adorned them with luxurious splendor so that people might gaze on them in wonder." He wanted to be gazed at in wonder. He built something that would make that happen for centuries after his death. And then, because his wife, Amytis, missed the green hills and gardens of her Persian homeland, he built her a garden in the sky. Terraced, irrigated, plants from across the known world carried to a desert city and made to grow above the rooftops. The hanging gardens of Babylon. One of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. Archaeology has never found them. Either way, this was the man. This was the scale. The same ambition that built the Hanging Gardens would burn Solomon's temple to the ground. Jerusalem was the capital of a small kingdom called Judah, and Judah kept making the wrong choice. Caught between Babylon to the east and Egypt to the south, the kingdom spent decades trying to play one empire against the other, paying tribute to Babylon, then switching allegiance to Egypt when it seemed advantageous, then switching back. Nebuchadnezzar came the first time in 597 BC to punish. He took the king, the royal family, the court, the nobility, the priests, the military. Thousands of people stripped from Jerusalem and marched to Babylon. He left a puppet king behind, a man named Zedekiah, and went home. Zedekiah rebelled. Nebuchadnezzar came back. The siege of Jerusalem lasted 30 months. The city was slowly starved. When the walls finally broke in 586 BC, Zedekiah tried to flee. He was caught on the plains of Jericho, brought before Nebuchadnezzar. His sons were executed in front of him. Then his eyes were put out. The last thing Zedekiah ever saw was his sons dying. Then the Babylonian forces entered Jerusalem. They burned the temple. They burned the palace. They burned every single building in the city. Everything of value inside the temple stripped and carried to Babylon. The walls of Jerusalem torn down. The temple of Solomon was gone. For the Jewish people, this was more than a military defeat. In the ancient world, gods lived in their temples. The temple in Jerusalem was the house of Yahweh, the place where the divine presence dwelt among his people. When Nebuchadnezzar burned it, he destroyed the place where God lived. The people who survived had to walk to Babylon, carrying that question with them. If Yahweh was the God of Israel, why was he sitting in the ashes of his own house while his people were marched into exile by the man who built the most magnificent city on earth? The answer they found in Babylon would change everything. The theology that emerged from that question, that Yahweh was not the God of a place, but the God of everything, that his power was not contained in a building that could be burned, would become the monotheism that shaped the world. Nebuchadnezzar didn't know it, but in burning Solomon's temple, he set in motion a transformation that would outlast his empire by 3,000 years. Among the thousands of people that were taken from Jerusalem to Babylon was a young Jewish man named Daniel. Daniel had a gift. He could interpret dreams. This made him valuable to a king like Nebuchadnezzar, who dreamed often and took his dreams seriously. The first dream came early in Nebuchadnezzar's reign. He saw a vast statue, dazzling, fearful, its appearance awesome. Its head was of fine gold, its chest and arms of silver, its belly and thighs of bronze, its legs of iron, its feet part iron, part clay, and then a stone, cut from a mountain by no human hand, struck the statue at its feet. The whole thing shattered. Gold, silver, bronze, iron, clay, all crushed together and swept away like chaff. The wise men of Babylon couldn't interpret it. Daniel could. You, O king, are the head of gold, the greatest kingdom, the most powerful. But after you will come other kingdoms, silver, bronze, iron, each one lesser, and finally a kingdom that is partly strong and partly brittle, like iron mixed with clay. And then the stone, a kingdom established by God himself, will shatter all of them and stand forever. Nebuchadnezzar was the summit, and everything after him was a step down. The second dream came later. The great tree in the middle of the earth, so tall it reached heaven, visible to the ends of the whole earth. Its leaves beautiful, its fruit abundant, every creature sheltering under it, every bird nesting in its branches. And then a voice from heaven. Cut down the tree, strip its branches, scatter its fruit, but leave the stump in the ground. The voice said something else. Let the man's mind be changed from a human mind to an animal's mind, and let 7 periods of time pass over him. Daniel's interpretation was careful, gentle even. The tree was Nebuchadnezzar. The cutting down was coming. but the stump would remain. The kingdom would be restored when the king finally acknowledged that heaven rules. Then Daniel begged, "Let my counsel be acceptable to you. Break off your sins by practicing righteousness. Perhaps there may be a lengthening of your prosperity." God was giving Nebuchadnezzar time, 12 months, a year to change course, a year to acknowledge that power he wielded wasn't his, that it had been given to him and could be taken away. 12 months passed, nothing changed. He was on the roof of his palace in Babylon. Below him, everything he had built, the walls, the gates, the temples, the gardens, the most magnificent city on earth spread out beneath him in every direction. He spoke, "Is not this great Babylon, which I have built by my mighty power as a royal residence and for the glory of my majesty?" A voice fell from heaven, "The kingdom has departed from you." And then he was gone. Driven from among men, he ate grass like an ox. His body was wet with the dew of heaven. His hair grew like eagle's feathers, his nails like birds' claws. The most powerful king in the world, in a field on all fours. The man who had stood on the banks of the Euphrates, crushed Egypt, burned Solomon's temple, and blinded the king of Jerusalem, eating grass in the dew. 7 years. The Bible records his restoration. At the end of the 7 years, Nebuchadnezzar raised his eyes to heaven. His reason returned, and the first thing he did was praise God. For his dominion is an everlasting dominion, and his kingdom endures from generation to generation. All the inhabitants of the earth are accounted as nothing, and he does according to his will among the host of heaven and among the inhabitants of the earth, and none can stay his hand or say to him, "What have you done?" He was restored to his throne, his majesty returned, his counselors sought him out. He became even greater than before. The arc of the story is almost too neat. Pride, fall, humility, restoration. The greatest king alive learning the one lesson his power had never allowed him to learn. But the neatness of it is part of the problem, because outside the book of Daniel, nobody recorded any of this. Babylonian records from Nebuchadnezzar's reign are extensive: building inscriptions, military chronicles, administrative documents, and in none of those records is there any reference to a period of madness. But there is a story, just about a different king. In 1952, nomadic Arab tribesmen discovered a series of ancient scrolls in a cave near the Dead Sea, among them 4 fragmentary scraps of parchment written in Aramaic. They told the story of a Babylonian king named Nabonidus. Nabonidus was the king of Babylon. He reigned from 556 to 539 BC, a generation after Nebuchadnezzar. And Nabonidus was genuinely strange. He abandoned Babylon for roughly 10 years to live in an Arabian oasis called Tamar. The Babylonian Chronicle records this as his absence. The New Year festival, the most important religious ceremony in Babylon, was suspended for years because the king wasn't there to perform it. The prayer of Nabonidus describes a king of Babylon afflicted with a terrible illness for 7 years, living in isolation, healed after praying to the God of the Jews. A Jewish diviner urging him to give glory to the Most High. Sound familiar? 7 years of affliction, isolation from men, a Jewish figure who points the king toward the God of Israel, a restoration after humility. The scholars who argue that Daniel borrowed from the Nabonidus story point to the parallels as too precise to be coincidental. The scholars who argue that the prayer of Nabonidus borrowed from the Daniel story say the same thing in reverse. The debate has never been fully resolved. What can be said with confidence is the most famous royal madness story in the Bible may have been told about the wrong king. If the two stories are connected, a tradition about Nabonidus may later become attached to Nebuchadnezzar, the greater king, the destroyer of Jerusalem, the head of gold, Nebuchadnezzar made a better story. Imagine being the most powerful person alive. You say burn, it burns. You say take them, they're taken. You say build me something the world has never seen, and they build it. For 43 years, that was the reality of one man. And then one day, his mind broke. He stood on a roof, looked down at his kingdom, and forgot who gave it to him. Whatever image of God you bring to this story, Daniel represents something older and stranger. A God who reaches into the most powerful mind on earth and switches it off. Who watches the greatest king alive eat grass in the dew for 7 years. And then gives it all back. The moment Nebuchadnezzar raised his eyes to heaven and submitted, the kingdom returned. The majesty returned. Everything he had lost was restored. That's the deal. Maybe God doesn't want worship, love, or even faith. Maybe he just wants us to remember who's holding the leash.